this year I feel an immense sense of urgency to get a lot more people trained and trustworthy and ready to go into schools with their background checks and feeling like they can make a difference in schools and with their nonprofit partners. Um, I spent the summer tutoring at a middle school near where I live at McFarland Middle School, and the needs of the students was just really compelling. So many of the kids are multiple years behind in reading and math, and could just see what a difference just caring adults made who could spend quality time with an individual student or a small group. Kids went from being quite frankly disruptive in class to really paying attention and feeling, I think, good about themselves. But we need literally thousands more people involved. And part of the purpose of these brief monthly meetings is to just give people a sense of confidence that they can get in there and make a difference. So Jan Silver's on the call here, who did last month's inaugural session, and I'm going to let Toll introduce Dr. Arianna Gard, who will lead tonight's session. And with that, take it away.
Right. So thank you for that introduction, Tom. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we're super excited to introduce you all to Dr. Arianna Gard. Dr. Gard, or Arianna, has a PhD in developmental psychology and neuroscience from the University of Michigan. She is currently a developmental psychologist, researcher, and professor at the University of Maryland, College Park. And that is where she specializes in children's social emotional development and how our experiences shape who we are. She is also the head of Gard Lab at the University of Maryland, where she studies how the environment shapes our brains and behavioral development. And with that, Dr. Gard, I will let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Toll. And thanks, everybody. I hope you get excited to relive your adolescence during this hour-long talk. When I was putting these together, I was just having lots of flashback, good and bad. But I'm really excited to be here today. A little more background about me. I also worked in juvenile hall in Oakland, California, where I'm from, for a couple years before I went to grad school. I've worked in a child trauma research program, so lots of experience with kids who, for no fault of their own, I think have some tough situations. So I'm really excited to I know no adolescents. I'm really excited to chat with you guys today, and I'm a quite informal person, so please interrupt me. Clarification questions, and let's get going. So I'm just gonna. Here we go. All right. Can y'all see my screen? And we're good? Great. All right. So what comes to mind when you think of teens? What words, what phrases? Go ahead and type them into your chat box. What do you think of? I'm going to bring up the chat here. What do you think of? Uncontrollable emotions and hormones to strong feelings, decreased inhibition, growth and changes, suicidal ideation, desiring independence. These are great. These are awesome. You guys are on it a little bit. I mean, you've all been through adolescence, so I'm not going to pretend like you're not your own expert. But friend groups, amazing. Peer pressure. You guys can give this lecture yourself. I don't even need to be here. So great. Those are great words to describe adolescence. And for sure, when we think about adolescence, the original guy, this guy really did it bad for teens because he coined the term storm and stress. That adolescence is this period of storm and stress, that emotions fluctuate rapidly and one extreme to the other, that adolescents want to be alone, but they also are entangled in these crushes and friendships. And this really fueled the idea that adolescents are pretty moody and emotional. And I'll show my age here, but in my late teens, these were the movies that I was watching. And these are all kind of depict this idea, right, of adolescence being kind of crazy, emotional, unpredictable. And then you see lots of news articles, you know, why teenagers act crazy. And so is this really how we think about teenagers today? Yes and no. The modern idea of adolescence really focuses, and a lot of folks talked about this, changes, is that maybe we don't want to think about this as a storm and stress period, but more as a period where there's a lot going on. So biologically, pubertal development is ramping up, hormonal sensitivity, brain plasticity is really in one of its peak developmental periods. And then socially, transitions between different types of school, brain shifting from parents to peers, and identity development, thinking about who you are and what you want to become. So unlike other developmental periods, there's this really huge shift in both biological and social changes at the same time. And social and emotional development, what we're going to talk about today, happens precisely because of these changes. So without these tough transitions, teens wouldn't really develop all of these social and emotional skills that they really need to thrive. So I'm curious, what skills do you think would fall under social and emotional development? What kinds of skills are social and emotional? You can go ahead and write in the chat box, call it out, unmute yourself. What do you guys think? Reflection, empathy, good. Emotion regulation, nice. Self-awareness. Any other ones? Leadership, man, again, this is great. So it's nice a little bit that some of adolescent research is pretty straightforward. Responsibility, excellent. Social awareness, beautiful. So what is social and emotional development? So most of the time we think about social, making friends, absolutely. Social and emotional development as part of 5 big boxes of skills. So 1, social engagement, someone literally said leadership, conversation, expressive skills, finding the words to express yourself. But cooperation, so you not only need the words to express yourself, but you also need to be able to take perspective taking, turn taking during conversations, having some capacity for trust and warmth and empathy, as someone said. Another domain is about innovation, about creativity and curiosity, sparking that excitement about what's next in life. But then there's also these kind of more cognitive parts that are oftentimes seen as more cognitive and less social and emotional, but you need these things to be able to do the social and emotional skills that are key in adolescence. So decision making, persistence, time management skills, and then lastly, probably what we think a lot about adolescence is emotional functioning and emotional resilience. So emotion regulation, having optimism, being able to manage your emotions and your anger. So these are all different facets, different parts of social and emotional development. And all of these skills together are quite predictive of lifelong outcomes. So achievement, employment, income, health and mental health, and civic engagement into. And of course, this isn't the only picture, right? There's also the social environment. So it's not only the skills that kids have, but the resources that enable them to build these skills. But if we just think about skill performance in each of these domains, it is quite predictive of outcomes. Now, the thing that I want to show you in this next part is that positive developmental outcomes and problematic function can happen in parallel. So you can have high performance in one domain that does not perfectly predict performance in another domain. So what I mean by that is here I've darkened the circles around social engagement and cooperation. And it is in the data, we see that there are some kids who are farther behind in things like time management and organizational skills, but they're really accelerated and on track in terms of social engagement and cooperation. And I guarantee that in your mentee relationships, you can find one aspect of these social and emotional skills that this child is good at, or that they're really interested in. And that's really the key, is to not have a blanket black and white, this child is doing good, this child is doing bad. It's really the nature of adolescence. Things are changing all the time. So what does the data show? I think, you know, I'm a data person. So I'm really going to focus on research that comes from big meta-analyses. So we summarize all the results from hundreds of different studies, or big data sets that represent a lot of people. So we call them population-based data sets. So we do know that there's a sharp rise in mental health challenges compared to other developmental periods. This would indicate challenge with the emotional resilience domain of social and emotional function. This is a figure, this is back in 2016, but the trends have continued in the same way, and in fact got worse during the pandemic. It's plateaued a little bit since then. But in nationally representative samples, 40% of teens between 12 to 17 years old meet criteria for a diagnostic and statistical manual mental illness at some point in the last year. Now, does it last for months and months at a time? Maybe not, but the burden on mental health among teenagers is quite large. And the disorders, the types of behaviors that we see contributing to this large percentage are anxiety disorders, major depressive disorders, oppositional defiant disorders, which is about aggression, rule breaking, and substance use disorders. So these are the most common mental health challenges that are facing our kids today. Drug and alcohol use. Please, does somebody have a question? No. Okay, all good. So in addition to more depression and anxiety, drug and alcohol use pretty normatively increases during this time. And alcohol use has actually been dropping steadily, but perhaps not surprising to many, marijuana use has increased, and illicit drugs are not increasing that much among this population. So unfortunately, we also know that starting alcohol and drug use early during adolescence really increases the risk for later impairment and substance use disorder. And if we think about these mental health illnesses, impairment in adolescence is quite high. So impairment is measured by the number of school days missed, if there's hospitalizations, if they're having trouble in different domains of their life. But 71% of kids who had a past year major depressive episode reported pretty severe impairment. But these are also the same kids who are not getting treatment, either because of lack of access, because of inadequate information, lots of reasons that treatment is not sought. So we do have a youth mental health crisis that is pretty clear. The U.S. Surgeon General report in 2023 came out and really highlighted that, showing lots of data about increases in loneliness. Manuel says, do you know what would be the #1 drug that would lead to their impairment and why? Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, any substance that's relatively easy to get and has systemic impacts on multiple parts of their lives. So it depends on where the child is. In different settings, different drugs might be more available. But yeah, it's a really good question. So I just painted a very sad picture. For sure, there's a mental health crisis among America's youth. However, at the same time, again, this idea of positive and harmful things happening at the same time, There's actually quite a lot of resiliency and self-esteem on average in the adolescent population. So what I'm showing here are two graphs, and they're tracking average levels of self-esteem within one cohort of a very large cohort, many thousands of adolescents, actually from the DMV, and tracking their levels of self-esteem over time. And over here on this left side of the graph, you can see that the numbers range from 1 to 5. So a number of 3 means that there's average levels of self-esteem. And we can actually see that there's some increases in the early parts of adolescence and then some decreases thereafter. So both resiliency, and this is resilient coping, so using strategies to deal with stress, can also be quite high in adolescence. Now, there's going to be lots of individual differences in this, but this is a pattern that has been shown in lots of different data sets, and it's a positive takeaway that there is still a lot of hope and higher self-esteem on average, even in the presence of mental health challenges. So positive and problematic development can happen in parallel. And as a mentor, you can really reiterate this point to mentees. My lab just had a focus group today with some 12 to 14-year-olds, and we asked them, is it possible to have be challenged with mental illness but still be doing well in other ways? And emphatically, yes. And I think if you talk to your own mentee, you will find that they feel similarly in some way, but might need some help finding out what their strengths are. Yeah, and Naima, and I apologize if I said your name wrong. Please.
Yes, I was just wondering, you said that self-esteem was a good, what am I trying to say? Basically, I want to understand more about why self-esteem is, the positive, considering like you can have you can be mentally ill and still have high self-esteem. Like, how does that
Yeah.
help us? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So these figures that I'm showing are kind of not looking at them together. However, when we look at groups of kids who vary on their mental health symptoms and self-esteem, it depends which mental illness we're talking about. So depression, for example, at its core is hopelessness and low self-esteem. But other types of challenges like aggression, rule breaking, might not have those impairments. So it's a great point. It really depends on the illness, but it's just one example of it's not either or. It can be a little bit of both. Another example is that kids who experience depression might have short periods of relief in certain environments where they feel really good. So around their friends. So if you have them ask them about self-esteem while they're interacting with friends, their ratings of self-esteem are much higher than if they're alone. So it's just to point out that there's a lot of variation and it's not so black and white. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. And so social and emotional development in all domains happens because of 3 big transitions. And this is this idea of the modern idea of adolescence as it's just a period where there's a lot of stuff going on. So we're going to talk a little bit about academics, about peers, and about neurobiology. Okay. So unfortunately, the riskiest times for dips in academic function and engagement occur at transitions. So like elementary school to middle school to high school. These are oftentimes the transitions where we see kids drop out, as well as have pretty severe dips in academic performance. So this is one example of a very large study. This graph is showing grade down at the bottom, so grade 7 to grade 11. And then it's 3 different types of school engagement. So I'll just do an example with the behavioral participation. So it's just the number of days that they're calling out sick and going to school. And on average, across the whole population, school and disengagement decreases pretty naturally. Like it's normal. This is a regardless of income, it decreases. You know, it might decrease less with more resources, but there's a negative trend. Why is this? Well, when we start moving from elementary school to middle school, schoolwork becomes more independent and passive. Also becomes just a lot harder, more cognitively demanding. So it's a easy way to just disengage and not be part of it. Schools are also larger and less personal, so we no longer have things like homeroom in general. And there's a big emphasis as we move to middle school and high school on ability and even competition between peers. So all of these things really create this perfect storm of disengagement from academics. So what helps? Oh yeah, Madeline. Can you say again at what age in general the social emotional well-being begins to dip? Yeah, so you see these mental health challenges really emerge at the onset of puberty, so around 10 to 11, and it gets worse and then it gets better as kids move out of adolescence into young adulthood. So there's a pretty large, unfortunately, period where symptoms are increasing and staying quite high, and then as we move into adulthood, not everyone recovers, but the large majority of teens do recover. Yeah, great. Does gender differ? Oh my God, lovely questions. Yes, so depends on the outcome, but if we're talking about anxiety and depression, which are the most common, girls are much more likely to show anxiety and depression for lots of reasons. There's some research that suggests that in part this is due to hormonal differences, but it's also really due to social reasons, different expectations that are put on girls versus boys, particularly with regards to home responsibilities. And I'm going to show you that bullying is also much more common in girls than in boys. And that's a huge contributor to differences, gender differences in mental health. Yeah. Great. I love these questions. Do school health classes address mental health? So this is a question that I asked the kids today. I asked them, have you ever had a class where a teacher has told you the signs of if somebody is experiencing suicidal ideation? So thinking about not wanting to be here anymore. And these are two kids who have been in 4 different public schools in DC, and they said, no. You know, I'm not an educational psychologist, so I'm not super caught up in that literature, but my sense, and Tom, maybe you can talk a little bit about this, is there's a desire for this, but the teachers and the administrators are just strapped, that they want it, but it's tough with timing. And I absolutely agree with you, Will. This should be part of curriculum.
Yeah, no, I would certainly concur. The teachers are stressed and feel like they certainly don't have the capacity to, in most cases, get to know the kids well enough to really make good mental health diagnoses. And
Totally.
I know many schools need more mental health specialists.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just say, and then Naima will get to you, that I want to make sure I'm pro teacher. Like I think, you know, it's not that teachers are really strapped. It is not their fault that there's this dip in engagement. It's just the structure of how schools are set up in our society. But Naima, please jump on in.
Yeah, I was just it made me think about I do parent engagement for my school district, as well as I have done like youth mental health first aid, and I don't know if that would be and we did have high school students in our course,
Yeah.
but I don't know if it would be as appropriate for the adolescents. And also what was I going to say about the adolescents? Do you consider them separately, since the girls tend to have puberty early?
That's right. Yeah, and that's also explains some of the increased risk for girls, is that they start puberty earlier, but the rest of their peers are not quite caught up yet. So there's this mismatch in development that leads to more bullying. Yeah. But what works? What helps school and academic, this dip in engagement? So school resources and family involvement, absolutely. So Naomi, you can probably talk about that, doing parent engagement. But mentoring programs are really effective. So mentoring programs in particular that target specific needs, in addition to broad social support. So in terms of specific needs, it's like academic performance or school attendance. They're much larger effects, and in fact double the size of the effect on academic outcomes versus programs that are solely friendship based. It's not that those programs are not important, but it is really helpful for all youth to have specific goals in mentoring relationships. It doesn't have to be a formal program that has this structured orientation, but when mentors and mentees make specific goals, those effects on academic engagement are much larger. And really importantly, these types of targeted mentoring relationships are helpful for all youth, but you see dramatically huge effect sizes for youth with low resources and minoritized teens who experience more discrimination, and teens who experience violence. So in some ways, this is a positive solution, right? Because there is a solution here. So I came up with some just ideas from this literature of what DCTMI mentors can do. I think that setting specific goals with your mentee can really address this targeted mentoring relationship. So you want to increase the grade on the next exam. You want to identify one subject to really encourage the teen to invest in. You want to read one short story or a graphic novel a week. So finding one goal, even if you're really there to just support and have positive interactions, which is lovely and wonderful, if you can add one little goal, that is going to increase the impact. Also validating that many teens become less interested in school, even high achievers. There's a natural dip in engagement during this period. So, validating that this is normal, but let's just find one thing that gets you excited. And then help mentees find those resources that can get them excited. So poetry competitions, there's tons of free workshops at DCPL in the Martin Luther King, the central branch of DCPL. There's even a kind of like a mock recording studio. So for the teens who are really interested in music and creative outlets, these are resources that can get them excited about something. So, I'm going to stay in school. I'm going to go to class so that I can do this one thing, and I'm going to go to school. I'm going to stay engaged in some way. Okay. So, does anyone want to stop and chat about academic engagement, or we're good? Okay, peers. So now we're not only talking about adolescents by themselves, but adolescents in packs, in groups. So in peers. Peers. I can't say it more. Adolescence is all about peers. There's a huge shift from caregivers to peers. Generally, kids become much less interested in adults and caregiver figures and much more interested in peers. In terms of quantity, though, it's not actually that teens spend less time interacting with parents. It's just that the nature of their interactions change. So their communication in terms of frequency remains similar, but they start increasing in their communication with peers. There's a fair amount of stability in the frequency of how teens are interacting with their caregivers. What does differ, that you might be remembering if you have your own child or thinking about teens, is that sometimes disagreements between parents and teens during this age can get more heated. So the number of disagreements and fights don't increase, but the intensity of some of those disagreements can. But interactions with caregivers are still quite relevant. It's just that peers really increase. And great, Maddie, the numerous lines are differences in gender and race and ethnicity, but the lines are not different from each other statistically. But this figure has them all plotted out. Great question. So how do friendships actually change? So we have on the bottom ages 9 to 17. And the first thing that friendships change, the way that friendships change, is because friendship networks become much smaller and more cohesive. So in childhood and the early parts of adolescence, kids are kind of friends with lots of other kids, and those networks become a lot tighter, a lot more cohesive. So what the impact of this is that kids have much stronger relationships with fewer peers. The reason why kids are friends with one another changes from childhood to adolescence as well. So earlier on in development, friends are friends because you spend a lot of time with them and you both like soccer, both like sports. But as we get into adolescence, as teens start thinking more about who they are, about their values and identity, friendships come together because of shared sense of reality, shared facts, and shared interest for sure. So how friendships change is important and is very key to adolescence. There's lots of positive outcomes of friendships too. So friendships provide support and validation. More friends, higher quality friendships are linked to less loneliness, depression, greater academic engagement, and buffering against stress. But also skill building. So I'll think about all of those social and emotional skills. So cooperation, perspective taking, modeling what's appropriate and what's not. And these are linked to great academic outcomes, more language expression, creativity, comprehension. So lots of good outcomes. And do friendships afford academic outcomes? Yes, this is a huge meta-analysis, and yes, friends are good for academic engagement if the friends themselves are also engaged in academics, right? But there are some risky parts of friendship. As we just talked about bullying. So bullying really increases dramatically during this early adolescent period. It is much more likely among girls than boys, and it is more likely among teens with lower self-esteem, academic performance, and in schools where there's worse climate. So bullying is not randomly distributed among teenagers. There are teenagers who are much more likely to be bullied and to suffer from the negative impacts of bullying. And then, of course, somebody said peer pressure. Peers really increase risk for substance abuse, aggression, and rule breaking, depending on the friends. So what can you do? What can the mentors do? Encourage positive friendships. Ask about kids' friends. Remember your mentees' friends' names and what interests they share in common with your mentee. This kind of your engagement in their friendships, in their positive friendships, can say a lot. They care a lot about their friends. So if you can show that you care about their friendships too, that can be a really good source of bonding. Include friends in the mentor relationship. So if it's feasible, talk about their friends during your meetings, have social breaks during meetings. If you're at the same school where two kids are really good friends and they're working on a similar thing, the three of you guys get together and do it. So incorporating friends into the mentoring relationship can be helpful as well. It really speaks to acknowledging that they're really into their friends and you're cool with that. Knowing the signs of bullying is really important. I put stopbullying.gov on. It has amazing resources about how to know the signs, what to do in situations where you believe bullying, how to have those difficult conversations. But some signs of bullying really overlap with mental health challenges, in particular anxiety and depression. So loss of lost or destroyed possessions, frequent headaches, kind of faking sick, changing eating habits. So a mentee who is like not showing up to your meetings, feelings of helplessness, and just avoidance of school and social situations in general. And in order to resist this peer pressure that's so common in this age, is to role play difficult conversations with your mentee and to set short and long-term goals. So the solution is not to disengage from all peers, but it's really to build up resistance, build up self-esteem, build up goals, so that when these tough situations come where somebody passes, X a joint or something, that child knows, like, I got goals, I got places to be, I'm going places, and I don't really need that. So building up instead of admonishing is always the best track with teens. Okay. And neurobiology, the brain. So myth or fact? Early childhood is the most important developmental period for brain development. Myth or fact? Type it in. Fact, 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 myth. Okay, okay. All right, well, it is a hard no. Adolescence and early childhood are both the two periods of enhanced brain plasticity, but for different reasons. So folks are absolutely right that there are critical neural and biological systems that have to be set up in early childhood: language, attachment, sensing threat and danger in the environment. But adolescence is another window of sensitivity. So the brain is absolutely plastic, and it's not that your and my brain is not plastic as an adult, but is far less plastic. And these two developmental periods where there are lots of opportunities for change: early childhood and adolescence. Why adolescence? Because of puberty. So pubertal hormones cross the blood-brain barrier, target regions all across the brain, and enable this period of greater plasticity. So puberty is tough, but it also brings a lot of opportunity. And again, brain plasticity overlaps with puberty for this exact reason: to enable more complex social and emotional development and to recover following stress. And there's literature on this, from animal models to human models. Kids who have experienced all types of adversity, and they experience recovery when intervention happens during adolescence, during that pubertal period. But after adolescence, the plasticity is far less. So Will, I feel like we've discussed changes that people experience as they become adolescents. What changes can adolescents expect as they age past adolescence? Beautiful, lovely question. So increasing independence is surely better emotion regulation capabilities, learning how to develop social networks that are supportive rather than harmful. Lots of good things. The thing that I teach most with the early adults that are, at Maryland and then in the community that I work with, is there's big increases in civic engagement and caring about stuff. And that in young adulthood is probably one of the coolest things, is that young people really start to get engaged in things. And I think that's trying to plant the seeds of what are you interested in now, and what kind of skills do we want to build to get you there, after college. Is there any specific case study example? Can you, Manuel, can you give me an example, or just describe a little more what specific case study of the plasticity in adolescence? Okay, type it in, and I'm totally happy to talk about specific examples. Absolutely. So there are three brain systems that drive all adolescent cognition and behavior. And Manuel, I'll come back to you for sure. So we have a socio-emotional system that is composed of brain regions that support sensation seeking and emotion sensitivity. These develop very early in infancy because infants need to attach to caregivers and find security. So in the early months of after birth, the regions in the brain that support sensation seeking and sensitivity towards cues begin to develop. Then we have a cognitive control system, and these are brain regions that support attention, decision-making, planning, most concentrated in your prefrontal cortex. And unfortunately for teens, the prefrontal cortex really doesn't peak in development until late adolescence and continuing into early adulthood. So there's already a mismatch between sensation-seeking regions and cognitive control regions. But there's also another system that relates to peers and puberty, which is mentalizing. So brain regions that support interpreting other people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors really comes online during adolescence. So you have this convergence of three different systems that have different timing in terms of their development. And in many ways, that's what produces this increased risk of mental health challenges, increased emotionality, and combine that with the social changes, changing school, peers coming into fruition, and pubertal hormones. So I do want to give some examples because I'm a neuroscientist, so I like talking about some examples. So there's a task called the reading the mind in the eyes test. So you can see this person here has something, I mean, I don't know what this person's affectal expression is, but we can present these images to teens while they're in a MRI, while they're in a magnetic resonance imaging that measures blood flow to different parts of their brain. And what this research showed is that the mentalizing regions, those regions of the brain that are responsible for perspective taking, thinking about what others are feeling, were highly activated in the 10 to 12-year-olds, but really decrease in strength as we age. So the brain of an adolescent is tuned towards others' emotions, others' perspectives, others' feelings, and we see that at the level of the brain as well. Here's an example, again, of this rapid increase in blood flow to regions of the brain that are related to mentalizing. So mentalizing, peers, puberty, it's all part of the same story. And so if we think about these three different brain systems, we can also explain risk-taking and mental health challenges in adolescence. So risk-taking occurs in a social context. I'm going to play one of my favorite clips, and I would, here we go.
Relax. Take it out, baby. Just relax. Take it out. Take it out. I'm here with you. I'm here with you. Keep your hand on the wheel.
Okay, so you get the point. This is Clueless. That's what I was watching when I was a late adolescent. The risks from Dee's driving were in part from the fact that she has her two best friends, her boyfriend, her best friend in the car, and they're amping her up. And we can look in the brain in terms of where blood flow is going to different parts while kids are actually playing a task where they're driving in the scanner. So we can project while people are in the MRI, a game, it's a computer game where they're driving. and we can measure how many times they crash, how many yellow lights they go through, so how many risks they take when they're driving. And in this study, which has been replicated lots of times, if you have a kid bring their best friend into the MRI room with them and have their best friend just stand outside of the MRI machine, not do anything. Can you guys hear me? Yes? Okay. If you have the kid, their best friend, in the MRI center with them, they will take far more risks. They will crash more, they will run more red lights, and regions of the brain in the mentalizing network are far more activated when a peer is with them versus when they're alone. So in this figure, these red bars indicate when the best friend was in the MRI with them, right? And we have adolescents, young adults, and adults. And what you can see here is the number of, on the y-axis on the left-hand side, this is the number of risky decisions that they make. And here on this bottom figure, this is the brain activation. And all you need to see from this figure is there's huge increases for the teens when their friends are there versus when they're alone. So we see this in terms of the number of behavioral risks they take. We see it at the level of the brain. Peers are so powerful for kids. And combine that with an underdeveloped cognitive control system, it's not surprising that teens act the way that we perceive them to act. So what mentors can do: recognize that teens are actually behaving very rationally with the skills and the resources, both neurobiologically and socially, that they have. And I think talking to teens about this is very helpful. Emphasizing that recovery from stress is possible, and it is absolutely empirically supported in the data. So I'll go back to Manuel's example, his historical specific person. So I don't know if anybody had heard of the Romanian orphanages that were in the, yep, I'm seeing heads. Yeah, so unfortunately, these kids had very poor treatment. They were left in cribs. They rarely touched any teachers. They did not receive a lot of nurturing care, very low cognitive stimulation. And these kids had, on average, pretty harmful outcomes. But it turned out that kids that were adopted during early childhood or early adolescence had almost a full recovery. But kids that were adopted within the childhood period, right after early childhood and before adolescence started, and then right after adolescence, but before emerging young adulthood started, those kids did not do well. And they measured brain function many decades later. And those kids that were adopted during that key period had brain patterns that resembled kids who had never even lived in the Romanian orphanages. There were no differences in brain function or structure between those kids. So I hope that gives maybe one example, Manuel. I can also absolutely put together some examples and readings. I'm happy to do that. Do people that suffer trauma after adolescence have a worse prognosis? It depends, but in terms of neurobiology, there's less plasticity. So less room for change, but not impossible. Things like cognitive behavioral therapy are quite effective when combined with medication for adults across the lifespan. But the time to recovery is oftentimes longer as well. So that's a great question, Will. Yeah. So those are the big things that adolescents are dealing with. They're dealing with a lot. So we talked about peers, we talked about academics, we talked about the brain, tried to give some tips throughout. And I'm thinking now, I'd really love us to break into small groups if you're up to it. If you're not up to it, just, stay in the main room and talk about some strategies for how can we get kids pumped up, even if they are, struggling in some parts of their lives than others. thinking back to your teen years, what was most helpful? Was there someone that really sparked some optimism and plug? So if we can, I'd like to break out and then I'll just stop sharing screen and you guys can just ask me all the questions, if there are any.
I don't know if this is your kind of question, but it might be. So I work primarily with adults. Yesterday, I saw a woman who's, let's say, 38-ish. When she was of the age that we're all talking about, it was pretty hard for her. She felt unseen, she felt unheard, she felt mistreated, and there was no one scaffolding her, supporting her, listening to her, any of that. And she's furious as an adult still, as if it's happening in the moment. So it's trauma, right? So we broke down, and we're working directly on this. We broke down something that had actually occurred with a friend. And I put it into chunks and I said, so A happened, and then B happened, and then C happened, and D happened. And actually, she exerted her agency and was responded to. But I heard, and here comes my question for you. I heard myself say to her, it's as if your emotions haven't caught up with her cognition. And when you were talking about the three systems, I was thinking how unevenly developed. And I just wonder what you have to say about that kind of asynchronous development.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that, cognitive processes like attention and decision making happen in much more outside of conscious awareness than like emotion regulation. And so when we experience a traumatic event, it's we are just like rats, we freeze or flight. And what a downstream outcome of that is total emotional suppression. But the thinking about the memories, the cognitive things that go on behind that experience can happen regardless. So, I would say that it's, that might be a function of just not having the space at the time that the trauma existed to fully process it and talk about it. And, I think lots of trauma-informed care tries to resurface those experiences so that folks can think through the emotions that they're dealing with.
I also understand that the newer thinking, and please tell me if this is not right, is that venting is overrated. In fact, that it strengthens the neural connections of the firing of the original trauma.
So just in the same way that, we can get on kind of a rat wheel and think about the same thing over and over and over again. If you do bicep curls over and over and over again, your muscles are going to get stronger. And the same thing goes for neural connections as well. So it's a use it or lose it, is a pretty common phrase. So yeah, you're right in some ways. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I just want to, I'm happy to answer more questions, but I just want to share the last screen because it has some resources on it for y'all. And you're going to get this as a PDF, and then I think it's being shared somewhere as an audio. So you can contact me at any time. If if there are some studies that I talked about that you want to like read the paper, unfortunately with science, all papers aren't freely accessible because that's a thing that happens with science. If there is ever a paper or a topic that you want something to read about, just shoot my lab an email and we will send you something. This is a very easy thing that I can do. So if there's some topic that's really interesting to you and you want some more literature to read, I am happy to give that. I also wanted to point out to some of your mentees as well. We had we hosted and recorded a webinar on education, so preparing, applying, funding college, as well as finances, and it is both in English and Spanish. It concurrently. So these are freely accessible webinars that can be accessed by anyone. These are YouTube shortened links. So I just wanted to give those resources. I am very much around, and I'm always happy to talk about science and teens and anything. So I'll stop there, and I think we have a few more minutes left if folks have like any other questions. Yeah. Oh, Jan, I think maybe you're talking, but you're muted.
Now am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So I was telling in my breakout room that over 40 years ago in a master's program, I did a study with a freshman class in a high school on self-esteem and school absenteeism.
Mhm.
And I feel like we've known all of this stuff for a very long time, because obviously I was not the first. And I was this unknown nothing, along with lots of other people doing the same kind of research. And I feel like we've known all of this stuff forever, but that schools have not been willing, able, I think in part willing, to do anything about bullying and teaching resilience and building self-esteem. And do you think things are any better now than they were when I did this stuff in the 80s?
You know, Jan, I told, a lot of these things that maybe the brain stuff is new, but a lot of adolescence is like pretty straightforward,
Yeah,
you need to
it's
like
not new stuff.
pump
Yeah.
kids up, and I'm not sure, but I will recount one example is I have a friend who runs a intervention program to bring mental health care to the high schools. So this is that somebody asked this question, should this be in high schools? It's called the Trails program. And it got lots of attention. And in some states that have certain leanings, they have banned the program from high schools. And the rationale is if we talk about mental health, it's going to cause more mental health problems. So that's just one example, but it is a nationwide program that has been rolled out in some states and not others.
So when I was in California, I was in Cupertino living, but in San Jose. So you know where I was.
Yeah.
I got trained in a program called Second Step, which was being widely used in California to deal with bullying. But I have not seen anything since I've been on the East Coast, and I'm from the East Coast originally, that has done any of that.
It's a patchwork, some counties do it, some school districts do it, some don't. There's my understanding is that it's not a nationwide effort.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't. Yeah,
I
I hear from my kids that I tutor all the time about incidents that happened at school. And what did I do? I did what I was supposed to do. I told an adult. And what did the adult do? Nothing.
Yeah. Well, mentors are important, and
yes, extremely
mentors
important.
and tutors, these kids need you. And, again, we shouldn't have to be doing this. The system should be catching these kids, but like, let's bring our strengths to the table. Yeah. Will just said, you mentioned earlier you weren't an educational psychologist. Thanks for sharing your lab's resources. Do you recommend any resource we can learn about curriculums for health education? I will pull some things together and send it to DC TMI, and Toll, you guys can circulate that.
Yes, yeah, we're doing a post-event email where we're sending a recording of this as well as the slides. We'll definitely include anything that you send us as well.
Great. So yeah, Will, absolutely happy to do that.
Hi, this is Loretta.
Hi.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you what about teachers bullying students? Do you encounter that, or do you have research on that?
I am not familiar with that research. That is very upsetting.
Because I work with a lot of children, and in cases where the teachers were actually bullying the
Oh, really?
students, and actually they were creating an environment that was very toxic in the classroom and things.
So yeah, I'm, it's very upsetting. I will say though, the big area of research that relates to that is, unfortunately, kids who go into puberty earlier, who mature a little earlier, receive differential treatment from teachers. So these kids tend to be perceived as more mature than they are, so they should be behaving in a certain way. So they get suspended and admonished more frequently. Their teachers are harsher to them. I don't know exactly about bullying, but that is related. And the fact that, you know, early pubertal development is more often faces girls experience more puberty. You know, these are all related issues. So there is some literature on that, Loretta, and I would be happy to also send that to DCTMI about puberty and differential teacher treatment if you'd like that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Arianna. If there are no further questions, we'll call it a wrap, but thank you all. Thank you. Thank you all for your great questions and involvement, and keep you posted on our next session. And yeah, thank you so much, Arianna. This is wonderful.
All
Yes,
right, I'll
thank
see
you.
you all around DCPS.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.